Hey, welcome to my second re-recorded tutorial. Today we will gonna make an effect like this. And we will of course use the newest Blender 3.4 Alpha. You can download it under blender.org or with the Blender launcher. And then we can just go into Blender and delete everything and add a cube back in. And then we can go into geometry nodes and we can create a new node tree and just stretch it a little bit like this. And then we can cut the wire. And I want to use with Shift A, you can go into the add menu and we can use a curve primitive and curve circle. So this will be the basic geometry. This is the basic ground where I want to scatter my points on or distribute my points on. But right now this is just a curve. It has to be filled with faces. And how can we fill curves? There's a node for it. So press Shift A again and go into the curve submenu. And here we should have the fill curve node. You can grab that, just snap it in here. And now this is automatically converted to a mesh, as you can see here. Input curve, output mesh. And now this circle is filled. So we can now distribute our points on here. So distribute points on faces. So points are just coordinates. They're infinitely small. They're just coordinates of 3 numbers that we scatter on our circle here. And we can use those points or coordinates to replace them with another object or a mesh. In our case, we want to instance on our points with another mesh. So I want to use a bunch of stuff that we have here, like a cone. So just drag down our scale here, maybe even further, maybe like this. Now I want to have this cone not as a mesh, I want to have it as an instance. And there is a node for it. It is in the geometry to instance, and we can grab it here. And now we can plug on here, pick instance. And now it shuffles through all the objects that we have here. So I want to also use a cube, sorry, like this. And now as we converted the geometry to instances, it picks randomly what meshes it uses. And I want to have also a cylinder, plug it into the geometry to instance. And here again, it chooses randomly what object to use. And I want to have an Icosphere. And as last thing, I want to have a cone, but sadly we don't have a cone here, but we can create simply one ourselves. So just grab a curve primitive curve circle and just plug it into the geometry to instance. And we can convert our curve to a mesh because now we have this profile curve. And we can just grab another curve circle for the profile curve, just scale it down. And now we have all objects we need. We can collapse this so it's more user-friendly if you want to. So now we take all those meshes or geometries and convert them to an instance. And now this node looks for every point to grab a random of those meshes. So now we can work with that, and we can, of course, it's procedural, we can always change the amount and things like that. Now we want to move the whole thing. So first of all, I just need here on the bottom the timeline for later. How can we move things? We have to set another position. So we have to grab in the geometry submenu the set position node. And this is the node we use every time for changing the position of something. So please remember that node. And now we want to have a sine wave that goes from the middle, and it manipulates only the z-axis. So we have to use a combine XYZ node. You can just search it. I'm not sure where it is exactly. And we have to use these z here on the bottom. How can we get the middle from? We just have to use the position input node, and with the vector map node set to a length, we can convert it to a value, and now we have the position on the z-axis, and now this goes infinitely. So we have to manipulate our value here with a math node, and this should be set to sine. Right now we can't see much of a difference. That's because our value goes from 0 to 1, and the sine needs values that are higher, so they will get wavy. So we just grab a math node before the sine and set it to multiply, and now we can drag this slider up, and now we decide how much waves we want to have on here. But we can see the whole thing is way too large, so we will be grabbing our multiply node again and set it one time after the sine, and we will maybe set it to 0.1, and here we can control the height of the whole thing. As you can see, it's not animated, so how can we now animate the whole thing? Maybe I'll just grab something like 12 and maybe 0.05. But how can we now animate the whole thing? Because as you can see, it's not animated. We can just use a math node before the first multiply and just use it as an add. And here we can see if we will drag this, the whole thing gets animated, and we can use a scene time node. Just search for it and take the seconds into the add value. Now you can see, yay, it's animated. Maybe a little bit too fast, so just multiply our time by, let's say, 0.3 or so. No, still too fast, 0.1, like this. Maybe 0.15. Yeah, that looks quite right. And now we are basically ready with our animation. Maybe we need more objects, so just turn on more distribution. And now we can move on with the material side of things. And this should be also interesting because we have to transfer a lot of attributes over to the shader, to the shading, to achieve great effects. So let's leave it as Eevee and go into rendered mode and enable bloom for later, and maybe screen space reflection. And for now we want to create a new material, but as you can see, it's not using our material. That's because we're not using the group input, so it doesn't know the information that the original object had. So we have to reassign our material to this object here, add another node, and go into the material submenu, and here is the set material node. Just grab it real quick, and then we can use the material 001, whatever you have here. And now it should be working. Yes. And we can go into our shader. So here we want to have, first of all, emission. So turn on that. And I want to have the background completely black. So turn that off. And now I want to have a random color, a random value for every single object, so I can color it differently. And for this we need to go back to geometry nodes, and here we have to now transfer some attributes over to the shading. At first we want to have a random value for every single object. I can't just plug it into the group output and say rand as an attribute name, and then go back to shader node and grab the attribute node and type rand. That doesn't work because we have still instances. So we have to realize those instances to gain access to the geometry of the whole thing. And we can do this by going into the instances submenu, and here's the realize instances node, like this. And now you can see we have a random value for every vertice of our object, but we don't want that. We want to have it for every single instance. And how can we do this? We can just go our tree back, and before we realize it, we have the information of our instances. So we have to just freeze our time to here, and we want to say capture our attribute at this stage of our node tree. So as we had instances, and just then go out, and I don't want to have it sampled at points. I want to have it each instance, like this. And now we have a random value for every instance. So we have the first attribute shipped over to our nice shader editor. And now we need more information. We want to have also the Sine. And so we grab that and also output it and maybe call it Sine, like this. Then go over to geometry shading nodes and multiply our attribute input node, and we want to have the Sine attribute like this. But as you can see here, the Sine goes always from 1 to -1. For shading, that's not ideal, so we just have to manipulate the whole thing. So grab a math node, multiply the whole thing by 0.5 and add 0.5 back in. So now we can use it in the shading. So for now we can make our first color adjustment. With our Sine and the random attribute, we can now grab a color ramp and use it with the random attribute, plug it into the emission color, and with this we can choose some random colors like this maybe. And now we want to use a hue saturation value node, and we want to use the sine wave as our hue, so we can get a nice colorful animation here. And as you can see here, the further away your colors are, the more distribution you will have, like this. So I recommend only slightly use different colors. So now as we have this, maybe turn down the roughness, but now we want to have also a fade off from the middle to the outside, so we don't want to have our outside here to be illuminated. And so we don't want to see a real edge here on the outside. So we need the distance from our middle to the outside. We don't already have that here in geometry nodes. It's our length here. That's the distance from our middle. So we just have to output this also, and we just call it length. And we go back to shading, and here we have the length attribute. Just look at it. Yes, it's the opposite. So grab real quick a color ramp, just set it to linear ease, and just flip the handles like this. We can use this for the emission strength. Now it should look like this. And as you can see, the playback speed is really slow right now, and so we can turn down the resolution on our objects a little bit. So like the cone, we don't need that much vertices. I think those are enough, 6. And the cube is already, and here the cylinder, we also don't need more than 6. And the Icosphere is already the lowest resolution, but the curved circle, we don't need more than 8 as a resolution here. And now it should be much quicker, as you can see. And now we have another problem. I don't want to have this. Maybe you want to have this, but I don't want to have a fall off on an object. I just want to have each object have one solid color. How can we do this? We can just use a Captcher attribute node here again and just limit all our outputs here to an instance like this. And now you can see every object has just one solid color. And we can just do that also with our length, but that shouldn't matter. Like this. And now you can see we have nice playback speed and our animation is working. One little thing we also can do for a really nice effect, as you saw in my preview, we can just use a math node add to the emission strength, and we can use our random attribute here with a little color ramp, and we can assign very few objects to be very bright. So we have this kind of glitter effect. We just crank it down to very few objects, and now we can turn this up a bit like that, and now we have this nice glitter effect. Maybe we can also crank the overall value up, and we don't need that much of glittering objects. And now the last thing that you maybe want to do, if you want to have a center here, maybe grab an Icosphere like this, scale it down of course. We want to give it a nice, really quick material. Take a layer weight node to have a Fresnel effect. Take the facing and plug it into the emission color. Then we can take a color ramp to use here a nice color. Turn the emission strength up so it's glowing like this. And you can also play around here with the blending of the layer weight node. And now to animate our Icosphere here, we can go into the graph editor and we can create a keyframe with I, pressing I, for the location and the rotation like this. And I want to have a rotation on the z-axis, so select that. And I want to go to the modifiers and I want to have a generator. So I want to have it spin on the z rotation like this continuously, but crank our value here down to 0.1, so it's relatively slow, maybe 0.03 like this. And now it's rotating continuously without any keyframes, so it's just going endlessly, as you can see here. That's a nice trick, so you don't have to use then keyframes. We just have to use here at the beginning one keyframe to gain access to our channels here. And now I want to also animate the Z location. So select the Z location here at the left. And I want to use a built-in function. So it uses a sine wave to manipulate the Z location. You can see it down here. And we can see it's a little bit too strong, as you can see here. And so lower the amplitude to something like, and please select additive, so it adds to our current location and not begins at 0. So we want to have it in a range like this, but we want to have it way slower. So turn down the phase multiplier maybe to 0.2. No, 0.1 should be fine. Yeah, like this. And now we have our nice animation. I think this should be it. Thank you all for watching and see you later. Thank you. Goodbye. Have a nice weekend.